You may not know the Annenberg name, but you grew up in their world. They were the hidden hand that placed TV Guide on your parents' coffee table. They were the voice behind 17 magazine that shaped what a generation of young women wore, bought, and dreamed of. For 50 years, they built a quiet empire of influence that touched millions of American lives. But behind that sanitized mainstream success lies a story of violence, scandal, and a criminal enterprise that made it all possible. This is the story of the family who sold America its culture and the dark secrets they kept along the way. To truly understand the Annenberg saga, we must first immerse ourselves in the world that created its patriarch, Moses Annenberg. Imagine America at the turn of the 20th century. It wasn't just a country, it was a crucible, a roaring furnace of change, forging a new identity from the raw materials of industrial might and the dreams of millions fleeing poverty and persecution in the old world. Cities like New York and Chicago were exploding, swelling with a cacophony of languages, cultures, and ambitions. This was the Gilded Age, an era of staggering wealth and crushing poverty, of robber barons building empires, and tenement families just struggling to survive. In this vibrant, often brutal landscape, information was power, and the primary source of that information was the newspaper. This was the golden age of print, but it was also the age of the newspaper wars. Titans like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst were locked in a titanic struggle for dominance, pioneering a sensationalist, often reckless, style of reporting known as yellow journalism. They understood that news wasn't just about informing the public, it was about grabbing their attention, stoking their emotions, and, most importantly, selling papers, millions of them. Circulation was everything, and the battles for it were fought not in elegant offices, but in the streets with fists, clubs, and sheer intimidation. Distribution networks were lifelines, and controlling them was a brutal bare-knuckle business. It was into this world, a world of raw ambition, cutthroat competition, and loosely defined rules, that Moses Annenberg arrived. He didn't just witness this era, he became its quintessential product, a man who learned its rhythms, mastered its dark arts, and ultimately sought to dominate it. Moses Louis Annenberg was born in 1877 in the small town of Calwaria, a village in a predominantly Jewish region of the Russian Empire, modern-day Lithuania. He was one of 8 children in a poor, observant Jewish family. Life in Calwaria was circumscribed by tradition and limited opportunity, shadowed by the ever-present undercurrent of European anti-Semitism. For his father, Tobias Annenberg, the promise of America was an irresistible beacon. Like millions of others, he saw it as a land not of guaranteed prosperity, but of a guaranteed chance, a place where a man's future wasn't dictated by his birth. The family emigrated in stages, with Moses arriving in Chicago in 1885 as a young boy. Chicago in the 1880s was the heart of the American machine, a city of slaughterhouses, steel mills, and skyscrapers reaching for the heavens. For the Annenbergs, it was a world away from the quiet life they had known. They settled in a crowded Jewish ghetto, where survival was a daily struggle. Moses was not a boy destined for scholarly pursuits. He was a creature of the streets. He dropped out of school early, taking on a series of odd jobs: messenger boy, bartender, street peddler. He was quick-witted, tough, and possessed an almost preternatural understanding of human nature, what people wanted, what they feared, and what motivated them. These were not lessons learned in a classroom. They were learned in saloons, on street corners, and in the relentless hustle of a city that rewarded the cunning and devoured the weak. His life found its direction when he entered the newspaper business, not as a writer or an editor, but at its most foundational, most brutal level: circulation. He got a job as a newspaper solicitor for William Randolph Hearst's Chicago American. And it was here, in the infamous Chicago circulation wars, that the legend of Mo Annenberg began to form. This wasn't a gentleman's game of sales figures and marketing strategies. It was a literal war. Hearst was locked in a vicious battle for supremacy with the publisher of the Chicago Tribune, Colonel Robert McCormick. Their respective circulation departments were essentially organized gangs, employing sluggers and thugs to seize territory, intimidate newsstand owners, and ambush the rivals' delivery wagons. Moses Annenberg thrived in this violent chaos. He wasn't just a participant. He was a brilliant field general. He had a genius for logistics and a stomach for the necessary brutality. He organized his crews with ruthless efficiency, anticipating his rivals' moves, launching surprise attacks, and securing the most lucrative street corners for Hearst's paper. He earned a reputation as a man who got things done, a man you did not cross. Legends swirled around him, stories of street fights, intimidation, and even deals struck in smoke-filled back rooms. Whether all of them were true hardly mattered. They cemented his reputation as a man who would win by any means. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he bought them, turning them into his own private army. Through a combination of strategic brilliance, raw nerve, and a complete disregard for the Marquis of Queensberry rules, he rose through the ranks, eventually becoming Hearst's head of circulation for his entire national chain. He had learned his first and most important lesson: control the distribution, and you control everything. Having conquered the world of newspaper circulation, Moses set his sights on a new, far more lucrative frontier. He had observed something crucial during his time with Hearst: the public's insatiable appetite, not just for news, but for information that could give them an edge, particularly when it came to gambling. In the early 20th century, horse racing was a national obsession, and betting on the ponies was a massive, if legally murky, industry. The problem for bettors outside the racetracks was getting reliable, up-to-the-minute information: race entries, jockey changes, track conditions, and most importantly, the results. Moses saw a monumental business opportunity in this information gap. He built his gambling empire not by founding the daily racing form, but by controlling the wire services that fed crucial race day information to bookies across America, a power that turned data into money and made him indispensable to the underground economy. But the real genius was in how he controlled the flow of information. He created a subsidiary, the Nationwide News Service, which monopolized the transmission of racing data from tracks all across America. Using a network of telegraph and telephone lines, the internet of its day, he could provide this crucial information to bookmakers, or bookies, in every city. He effectively owned the data stream. If you were a bookie anywhere in America, you had to subscribe to Annenberg's wire service to stay in business. He charged exorbitant rates, and if a bookie fell behind on payments or tried to get information from a competitor, Annenberg's enforcers would literally cut their wires, putting them out of business instantly. This was the foundation of the Annenberg fortune. It was a brilliant, vertically integrated monopoly built on a vice industry. He provided the information sheets, he controlled the wire that delivered the results, and he took a cut from the bookmakers who used his service. It was a cash machine of epic proportions, but it operated in the gray areas of the law and brought him into constant conflict with law enforcement and reformist politicians who saw him as the kingpin of a national gambling syndicate. He was powerful, feared, and becoming astronomically wealthy, but he lacked the one thing his money couldn't easily buy: legitimacy, and he knew just how to get it. In 1936, at the height of his power, Moses Annenberg made the move that would stun the establishment and redefine his public persona. He purchased the Philadelphia Inquirer, rebounded under his ownership, regaining profitability and becoming a formidable competitor in the city's fierce newspaper wars. But Moses Annenberg did not believe in a free and impartial press. He believed in his press. He wielded the Inquirer like a cudgel, using its pages to wage personal and political wars. His most famous and ultimately fatal feud was with President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his New Deal policies. Annenberg was a staunch conservative, and he used the Inquirer to launch blistering, relentless attacks against the president. He also entered a vicious public battle with the reformist governor of Pennsylvania, George Earle, who was a key Roosevelt ally. The paper became a vehicle for Annenberg's political ideology, blurring the lines between news reporting and propaganda. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a political kingmaker, a formidable enemy of the most powerful man in the world. And in doing so, he painted a giant target on his own back. President Roosevelt was not a man who took such attacks lightly. The vast and legally questionable financial empire that funded Annenberg's newspaper was about to come under the full, unforgiving scrutiny of the United States federal government. The Titan had reached the summit, but the ground beneath his feet was beginning to tremble. The wrath of a president once provoked is a powerful and dangerous force. By the late 1930s, Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration, spurred on by Moses Annenberg's relentless and deeply personal attacks in the Philadelphia Inquirer, decided that the pugnacious publisher had to be brought to heel. The perfect weapon was not libel law or political maneuvering. It was the quiet, methodical, and inescapable power of the U.S. Treasury Department. The complex, cash-heavy, and often clandestine nature of Annenberg's nationwide gambling wire service was a treasure trove of potential financial irregularities. For years, federal agents known as T-men painstakingly sifted through records, followed money trails, and interviewed hundreds of disgruntled former employees and terrified bookies. In 1939, after a massive and exhaustive investigation, the federal government dropped a bombshell that reverberated from Wall Street to the darkest back alley bookmaking joint. A massive federal indictment accused Moses Annenberg of evading over $3 million in income taxes, the largest tax evasion case in U.S. history at the time. The charges were staggering, accusing him of evading more than $3 million in income taxes, a figure equivalent to over $60 million in today's money. It was, at the time, the single largest tax evasion case in the history of the United States. The trial was a national sensation, a true media circus. The man who had used his own powerful newspaper to decry the supposed corruption and overreach of the Roosevelt administration was now painted across the front pages of every rival paper as the nation's #1 tax cheat. The prosecution, led by a determined team of government lawyers, laid out a damning and intricate case. They detailed a labyrinthine network of shell companies, fictitious names and hidden accounts, all meticulously designed to conceal the immense, untaxed profits flowing from his racing wire monopoly. Records were systematically destroyed, ledgers were cooked, and witnesses testified to delivering bags filled with cash. The government's message, delivered with courtroom solemnity, was crystal clear and aimed as much at the public as at the defendant. No one, no matter how rich, how influential, or how powerful their printing presses, was above the law. For Moses, it was a profound and bitter irony. He had craved legitimacy above all else, buying the Inquirer as a way to wash his name clean and secure a place among the nation's elite. Yet now The very source of the wealth that had enabled his rise was dragging him down into the most public and humiliating disgrace imaginable. He mounted a vigorous defense, hiring a top-tier legal team and trying to portray the case as a political witch hunt, a vendetta orchestrated from the White House. But the evidence was simply overwhelming. Faced with the mountain of documentation and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, Moses Annenberg, the street fighter who had never willingly backed down from a fight in his life, finally saw that he was cornered. He did the only thing he could. He surrendered. In a plea bargain agreement, he pleaded guilty to a single count of evading taxes for the year 1936. Part of the deal was a move to protect his family. In a final act of paternal protection, he took the full blame to ensure the charges against his son, Walter, were dropped. But the judge, viewing Annenberg as the architect of a vast criminal enterprise that had corrupted public life for decades, was unsparing. He was sentenced to prison and ordered to pay roughly $9.5 million in fines and back taxes, an astronomical sum for the time. It was a sentence designed not just to punish, but to utterly crush him. Moses Annenberg entered Lewisburg Penitentiary in July of 1940 as a convicted felon. The experience shattered him. The man who had commanded a national empire with an iron fist, who could make or break political careers with a single editorial, was now just inmate number 11, 8,160, stripped of his custom-made suits, his power, and his dignity. The rigid discipline and crushing anonymity of prison life were a brutal shock to a man accustomed to absolute control. His health, already precarious due to a severe heart condition, deteriorated rapidly behind bars. He suffered a physical and mental breakdown. After serving just 2 years of his sentence, he was granted parole on compassionate grounds due to his failing health. He passed away just over a month later, surrounded by his family. His complex, contradictory legacy was now left to his only son, Walter. The inheritance was immense, a vast and powerful media empire, including the crown jewel Philadelphia Inquirer, a string of popular magazines like Click and Screen Guide, and a network of radio stations. It was all built on a foundation of staggering wealth, but it was an inheritance deeply, irrevocably tainted by scandal, public disgrace, and the profound psychological burden of his father's spectacular fall from grace. The Annenberg name was now synonymous with crime and corruption. Enter Walter Hubert Annenberg. Born in 1908, he had grown up in the long, formidable, and often suffocating shadow of his father. Where Moses was rough-hewn, street-smart, and volcanic in temperament, Walter was more reserved, polished, and quietly yearned for the social acceptance and respectability that had always eluded his father. He'd been sent to the prestigious Petty School in New Jersey and had briefly attended the esteemed Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania before dropping out, a fact that left him with a lifelong insecurity about his lack of a formal college degree, often manifesting as a prickly sensitivity to criticism. He had worked in the family business from a young age, learning the ropes in the bookkeeping department and the circulation offices. But he was always the heir apparent, never the self-made man his father had been. He had seen the empire built, but he had also seen the moral compromises and the dark underbelly that sustained it. Now, at the age of 34, he was thrust into the leadership of an empire at its most vulnerable moment. He was no longer just the son of a magnate. He was the son of a convicted felon. The businesses were under a microscope. Creditors were circling, and many within the industry and the halls of power wondered if the quiet, reserved son possessed the necessary steel, the cunning, and the vision to salvage his father's tarnished kingdom. He was facing a Herculean task to save the business, to restore the family name, and to somehow step out from behind the towering, disgraced ghost of his father. Walter took the helm of Triangle Publications, the family's corporate entity, in a world undergoing a seismic shift. The trauma of World War II was over, and America was exploding into an era of unprecedented prosperity and cultural change. A new consumer society was being born in the rapidly expanding suburbs, and a revolutionary piece of technology was making its way into the heart of the American home, the television. In 1946, there were only a few thousand TV sets in the entire country. By the early 1950s, that number was in the tens of millions. Walter Annenberg possessed a quality his father, for all his raw business genius, perhaps lacked: a keen sense of the future, an intuitive grasp of the cultural zeitgeist. He understood that the media landscape was about to be utterly and permanently transformed. While other publishing magnates saw television as a mortal threat to their print empires, a flickering box that would steal readers away from newspapers and magazines, Walter Annenberg saw an opportunity of historic proportions. His first moves as head of the company were shrewd, deliberate, and aimed squarely at exorcising the family's demons. He set about cleaning up the business, systematically distancing it from its controversial past. His most significant step was distancing the company from its tainted past, shedding the remnants of the family's gambling-related enterprises to focus on legitimate media. It was a difficult decision, cutting off a massive stream of revenue, but it was a necessary amputation to save the patient. He wanted the Annenberg name to be associated with journalism and culture, not with backroom bookies and gambling syndicates. He focused his energies on strengthening the legitimate media properties, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and his growing stable of magazines. He was a demanding, almost obsessively hands-on manager. He was known to critique the font choices on a magazine cover, rewrite headlines himself, and scrutinize every line of a balance sheet. He was driven by a burning, almost all-consuming need to prove himself and to redeem his family's honor. He wasn't just managing an inheritance, he was on a mission. His masterstroke came in 1953 when he transformed Philadelphia's popular TV Digest into a sleek national magazine, TV Guide, that would soon become the definitive voice of America's new television age. The concept was deceptively simple, but logistically revolutionary. A compact, digest-sized magazine that was easy to carry and keep near the TV set. Each edition would provide detailed market-specific television listings, but this local information would be wrapped in a glossy national package of high-quality articles, celebrity interviews, behind-the-scenes stories, and television-related news. Skeptics in the publishing industry scoffed at the idea. They thought he was mad. Why would people pay 15 cents for television listings when they could get them for free in their daily newspaper? Walter understood something profound about the new television age that his competitors missed. Television wasn't just a new form of entertainment, it was creating a new shared national culture. People weren't just watching shows, they were falling in love with the stars, talking about the plots at the office the next day, and building their entire daily schedules around their favorite programs. TV Guide tapped directly into this burgeoning national obsession. It wasn't just a utility, it was a companion to the television experience. It told you what to watch, but it also told you about what you were watching, making you a more informed and engaged viewer. It was brilliantly marketed, placed not on traditional newsstands, but at the checkout counters of the new booming supermarkets, making it an easy impulse buy that quickly became an indispensable weekly ritual for millions of Americans. The magazine's growth was explosive, Within a decade, its circulation soared into the tens of millions. At its peak, TV Guide sold nearly 20 million copies a week and reached more than 40 million readers, ranking among the most widely circulated and lucrative magazines in American history. It was a cultural institution, a fixture in the American home as common as the television set itself. And it made Walter Annenberg not just staggeringly rich, but one of the most powerful and influential media moguls in the world. He had not only escaped his father's long, dark shadow, he had finally, definitively, cast a colossal and brilliant one of his own. With the unprecedented success of TV Guide, Walter Annenberg had secured his place in the pantheon of American media titans, but his ambition was far from satisfied. While TV Guide catered to the entire family, Walter, with his uncanny ability to spot demographic gold mines, identified another vastly underserved market, the American teenage girl. Before World War II, the concept of the teenager as a distinct cultural and economic force barely existed. But in the prosperous post-war era, adolescents suddenly had more leisure time and, crucially, more disposable income than any generation before them. They were developing their own tastes in music, fashion, and culture, and they were hungry for media that spoke directly to them, not to their parents. Into this emerging landscape stepped another key Annenberg publication, 17 magazine. 17 had been launched in 1944 within Triangle Publications, and by the 1950s, Walter Annenberg recognized its immense potential, pouring resources into transforming it into a cultural powerhouse. 17 became a Bible for millions of young women. It didn't just report on trends, it created them. The magazine taught its readers what to wear, how to apply makeup, how to talk to boys, and how to navigate the complex social rituals of high school. It was a guide to the bewildering and exhilarating process of growing up. The influence of 17 was profound. It played a pivotal role in creating and solidifying the teenager as a powerful consumer demographic. Advertisers flocked to its pages, eager to sell their products, from lipstick and records to soft drinks and prom dresses, to this new, impressionable audience. For Walter Annenberg, it was another brilliant business success, a perfect complement to his media portfolio. Triangle Publications, his corporate empire, now had a powerful grip on two of the most important focal points of American domestic life: the television set through TV Guide and the teenage daughter's bedroom through 17. The company was no longer just a business. It was an integral part of the fabric of American culture. By the 1960s, Walter Annenberg presided over a media empire of staggering scale and scope. Triangle Publications owned newspapers, a slew of successful magazines, and a growing portfolio of highly profitable television and radio stations in major markets. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in America. But the heart of the empire, the property that carried the family name and remained his most personal and prized possession, was still the Philadelphia Inquirer. And it was here, in the editor's office of the Inquirer, that the most complex and controversial aspects of Walter's character were on full display. Having redeemed the family name in the world of business, Walter now sought to use the paper to project his own deeply held convictions onto the political landscape. He was a staunch, unyielding conservative, a fervent anti-communist, and a loyal Republican. And he believed it was his right, even his duty, to use his newspaper to advance his political agenda. The concept of journalistic objectivity was, to him, a quaint and often naive ideal. He had seen his father use the paper as a weapon, and while he sought a different kind of respectability, he was not above wielding that same weapon himself. Walter's leadership style at the Inquirer can be described in one word: absolute. He was known as an autocrat, a publisher who ruled his newsroom with an iron fist. He involved himself in the minutiae of the paper's daily operations, often dictating headlines, ordering stories to be killed, and inserting his own opinions into news coverage. Journalists who crossed him or deviated from his preferred political line were often reprimanded or fired. This authoritarian approach led to frequent and bitter conflicts with his own staff and the wider journalistic community, who accused him of sacrificing journalistic integrity at the altar of his personal ideology. Perhaps the most notorious example came during the 1962 Pennsylvania gubernatorial race, when Annenberg unleashed the full power of the Inquirer against the Democratic candidate. Annenberg developed an intense personal dislike for the Democratic candidate. He proceeded to unleash the full power of the Inquirer against him, running a relentless campaign of negative coverage, biased reporting, and blistering editorials that many observers felt crossed the line from journalism into pure political propaganda. His preferred candidate, the Republican, won the election, but the episode left a lasting stain on the Inquirer's reputation and cemented Walter's image as a publisher who prized power over principle. It was a complex portrait, a visionary businessman on one hand and a domineering ideologue on the other. But there was another, very different side to Walter Annenberg that was emerging during these years of peak power. Alongside the shrewd media mogul and the hard-nosed political operator was Walter Annenberg, the sophisticated connoisseur. With his second wife, Leonore Rosenstiel, a glamorous and intelligent society figure, he began to assemble one of the world's most breathtaking private collections of art. They focused on French Impressionist and Post-Impressionist masterpieces, acquiring seminal works by artists like Monet, Manet, Renoir, Cézanne, Gauguin, and Van Gogh. Their collection became a thing of legend, a trove of beauty and cultural significance that rivaled that of many museums. This passion for art was more than just a hobby for a rich man. It was an integral part of Walter's quest for ultimate respectability. It elevated him from the gritty world of publishing into the rarefied air of high culture and philanthropy, a world his father could never have entered. It also subtly foreshadowed the family's ultimate shift in focus, a move away from the acquisition of media power and towards the stewardship of cultural treasures for the public good. Walter's staunch republicanism and his immense wealth made him a formidable figure in national politics. He was a major donor and a close personal friend to many of the party's leading figures, but his most important political relationship was with Richard Nixon. Annenberg was an early and ardent supporter of Nixon's political ambitions, sticking by him through his defeats and contributing lavishly to his successful 1968 presidential campaign. When Nixon won the White House, he looked to reward his loyal friend. He offered Annenberg the most prestigious diplomatic post in the world, United States Ambassador to the Court of St. James's in the United Kingdom. For Walter, this was the ultimate validation, the final glittering prize in his lifelong quest to redeem the family name. The son of a convicted felon who had been indicted himself was now being asked to represent the United States of America to its oldest and closest ally. It was a staggering ascent, a testament to his decades of tireless work to rebuild the family's reputation. However, the appointment was met with a storm of criticism. Detractors in the press and in Washington derided it as a blatant political payoff, claiming Annenberg had simply bought the ambassadorship with his campaign contributions. His tenure as ambassador began disastrously. During his first official appearance at court, nervous and overwhelmed, he famously committed a gaffe, referring to the official residence of the Queen, when he meant to say Buckingham Palace. The notoriously savage British press pounced on the error, mercilessly mocking the gauche American upstart. For a man as sensitive about his background as Walter, it was a humiliating ordeal. But Walter Annenberg was nothing if not resilient. He and Leonore poured their energy and their own personal fortune into the job. They undertook a magnificent, multi-million-dollar renovation of Winfield House, the ambassador's official residence, turning it into the most glittering and sought-after social hub in London. Their parties were legendary, their generosity was boundless, and their personal charm eventually won over even their harshest critics. Walter became a respected philanthropist in Britain, supporting cultural institutions and winning an honorary knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II in recognition of his generosity. By the time he left his post in 1974, after Nixon's resignation, Ambassador Sir Walter Annenberg was a widely respected and even beloved figure. He had not only succeeded in the role, he had excelled. He returned to America having reached the absolute zenith of his power and social standing, the ultimate symbol of the Annenberg name's complete and total rehabilitation. But even as he stood at the summit, the media landscape he had so masterfully conquered was beginning to shift beneath his feet, heralding the twilight of his empire and the dawn of a new, unforeseen chapter in his family's saga. Walter Annenberg returned from his triumphant post in London in 1974, standing at the absolute pinnacle of his power and social standing. He was a respected diplomat, a towering figure in media, a celebrated art collector, and a confidant to presidents. He had achieved everything he had set out to do. He had expanded his father's empire beyond anyone's imagination, and most importantly, he had washed the Annenberg name clean, elevating it to the highest echelons of society. And yet, the very foundations of the empire he commanded were beginning to experience tremors. The world was changing, and the media landscape that Walter had so masterfully dominated for 3 decades was on the brink of a radical transformation. The rise of cable television in the late 70s and 80s was the first major blow. Suddenly, Americans went from having a handful of channels to dozens and eventually hundreds. This explosion of choice began to erode the central, unifying role of TV Guide. The magazine, once the indispensable navigator of the airwaves, struggled to keep up with the sheer volume of programming. At the same time, the newspaper industry, including his beloved Philadelphia Inquirer, faced declining readership and new competition. In fact, recognizing the shifting tides and the immense capital required to compete, Walter had already made a momentous decision years earlier, selling the Inquirer and its sister paper, the Philadelphia Daily News, in 1969, just before leaving for London. It was the end of the Annenberg family's direct, day-to-day influence over the political discourse of a major American city. The era of the all-powerful press baron was slowly drawing to a close. The final definitive end of the Annenberg media empire came in 1988. In a move that stunned the financial world, Walter Annenberg agreed to sell Triangle Publications to the Australian-born media magnate Rupert Murdoch for a staggering $3 billion. At the time, it was the largest transaction in publishing history. The sale included the Crown Jewels, TV Guide, and 17 magazine, along with the rest of the company's holdings. When asked why he decided to sell the empire he had spent a lifetime building and protecting, Walter's reasons were complex. He was getting older, the industry was becoming more challenging, but perhaps the most significant factor was one of succession. He had no heir who wished to take over the demanding, all-consuming work of running the family business. This lack of a successor was underscored by a deep and enduring family tragedy. In 1962, Walter's only son, Roger, a brilliant but troubled young man, had taken his own life at the age of 22 while a student at Harvard. The loss was a devastating, life-altering blow from which Walter and his family would never fully recover. It imbued Walter with a profound sense of the fragility of life, and many believe it fundamentally shifted his perspective on the nature of legacy. The dynastic succession that had driven his father, and in turn himself, had been tragically broken. A legacy built on brick and mortar, on companies and publications, suddenly seemed less permanent, less meaningful. He began to search for a different kind of immortality, one built not on profit and influence, but on giving. This pivot towards philanthropy became the consuming passion of Walter Annenberg's later life. Even before selling his company, he had established the Annenberg Foundation and made enormous contributions to charitable causes. But now, he dedicated himself to it completely. He believed passionately in the power of education and communication to uphold democracy, and he donated hundreds of millions of dollars to found the Annenberg Schools for Communication at both his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, and at the University of Southern California. These institutions became world leaders in the study of media and public discourse. His grandest philanthropic gesture, however, came upon his death in 2002. He bequeathed his entire priceless collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist art, valued at over $1 billion, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was one of the most magnificent gifts of art ever given to the public. In this single act, Walter ensured that the beauty that had brought him so much private joy would be shared with the world for generations to come. He was transforming his personal legacy from one of a media titan to one of a monumental public benefactor. But the final, most profound transformation of the Annenberg name was yet to come, guided by a new visionary leader. The torch of the Annenberg legacy was passed not to a successor in business, but to a successor in philanthropy. Walter's daughter, Wallis Annenberg, having grown up amidst the splendor and power of her father's empire, Wallis possessed a different worldview, one shaped by the social changes of the 20th century and a deep personal commitment to community and social progress. Under her leadership, the Annenberg Foundation was reimagined. While honoring her father's focus on education and the arts, Wallis expanded the foundation's mission to embrace a broader and more contemporary range of causes: community development, social justice, environmentalism, and animal welfare. Her vision was less about building monumental institutions and more about creating dynamic, accessible public spaces and supporting innovative grassroots initiatives that could directly improve people's lives. The impact of this new vision is written across the landscape of Southern California and beyond. She spearheaded the creation of the Annenberg Community Beach House, a unique and beautiful public space built on the former estate of William Randolph Hearst's mistress, Marion Davies, offering free access to the coast for everyone. She founded the Annenberg Space for Photography, a vital cultural institution that brought world-class photography to the public, free of charge. And she transformed Sunnylands, her parents' magnificent winter estate in Rancho Mirage, into a high-level retreat center, often called the Camp David of the West, where global leaders could convene to address the world's most pressing problems. Through these projects and countless others, Wallis Annenberg has redefined what a 21st century foundation can be: a creative, responsive, and deeply engaged force for positive social change. The journey of the Annenberg family is a truly American epic, a three-act drama of staggering ambition, profound controversy, and ultimate redemption. It begins with Moses, the immigrant street fighter who clawed his way to the top, building a fortune in the shadows and a media empire in the spotlight, only to be brought down by the very system he sought to dominate. His is a cautionary tale of the corrupting nature of unchecked power. Then comes Walter, the heir, driven by the ghosts of his father's sins to build an even greater empire, but one founded on cultural influence rather than backroom deals. He conquered the American living room, advised presidents, and walked with kings, painstakingly transforming a tarnished name into a symbol of power and prestige. His life underscores the immense complexities of balancing personal authority with public responsibility. And finally, Wallace, the visionary, who inherited not a business to be run, but a legacy to be redefined. She understood that in a new century, true power was not in what you owned, but in what you gave away. She shifted the family's vast resources from shaping media to shaping a better society, a transformation that turned a private fortune into a public trust. Their story is more than a family history. It's a reflection of the evolution of power itself in America. It's a journey from the raw accumulation of wealth to the sophisticated wielding of influence, and finally to the quiet, enduring impact of philanthropy. It reminds us that legacies are not set in stone. They can be challenged, rebuilt, and ultimately redeemed. The Annenberg saga teaches us that the greatest empires are not measured by their balance sheets, but by their lasting contribution to the human story.